Question 1. During an internal audit of an organization's environmental impact valuation process, an auditor is reviewing the methodology used to incorporate the social and cultural significance of a river ecosystem. The organization has identified that the river is a vital cultural heritage site for indigenous communities and a source of spiritual well-being. Which approach, consistent with ISO 14008-2019 principles, would be most appropriate for the auditor to assess the integration of these non-use values into the monetary valuation? Option A. Checking if the valuation report explicitly states that social and cultural impacts are considered non-monetizable and therefore excluded from the quantitative assessment, citing the difficulty in assigning monetary figures. Option B. Evaluating the inclusion of stakeholder consultation records and the justification for using qualitative method to capture the cultural and spiritual significance of the river, alongside any attempts to monetize these aspects using techniques like contingent valuation or choice experiments. Option C. Verifying that the organization has solely relied on market-based approaches, such as the price of recreational fishing permits, to reflect the river's value, assuming this implicitly covers all societal benefits. Option D. Confirming that the monetary valuation primarily focuses on direct use values, like the economic output from hydropower generation, and that any mention of social or cultural aspects is purely descriptive, without any attempt at quantification or integration into the financial assessment. Correct answer is B. Evaluating the inclusion of stakeholder consultation records and the justification for using qualitative methods to capture the cultural and spiritual significance of the river, alongside any attempts to monetize these aspects using techniques like contingent valuation or choice experiments. Explanation. ISO 14008-2019, specifically in its guidance on integrating social and cultural values into monetary valuation of environmental impacts, emphasizes the need for a robust and transparent methodology. When an internal auditor reviews a valuation process, they must assess how well these non-market values are captured and represented. The standard advocates for methods that acknowledge the intrinsic worth of cultural heritage sites, the aesthetic value of landscapes, or the social cohesion tied to natural resources. These are often referred to as non-use values or existence values, which are distinct from direct use values, like timber harvesting, or indirect use values, like flood regulation by wetlands. The auditor's focus should be on whether the valuation framework employed by the organization has mechanisms to elicit and quantify these less tangible, yet significant, societal benefits or costs. This involves examining the engagement with stakeholders, the selection of valuation techniques that can accommodate qualitative data, and the justification for any assumptions made in translating social and cultural significance into monetary terms. For instance, a cultural ecosystem service valuation might involve contingent valuation or choice experiments designed to understand community preferences for preserving a particular natural area, considering its historical or spiritual importance. The auditor must ensure that the process is systematic, well-documented, and defensible, reflecting the principles outlined in ISO 14008-2019 for comprehensive environmental accounting. Question 2. During an internal audit of an organization's environmental management system, an auditor is reviewing the monetary valuation of air pollution impacts from a manufacturing facility. The organization has chosen to use a damage cost approach, citing its direct link to observed environmental and health consequences. What critical factor must the auditor primarily assess to ensure the application aligns with ISO 14008-2019 principles for this specific valuation? Option A. The simplicity of the reporting format used to communicate the monetary valuation results to stakeholders, prioritizing ease of understanding over methodological rigor. Option B. The robustness and comprehensiveness of the data used to estimate the physical quantity of pollutants and the scientific basis for the dose-response functions linking these quantities to health and environmental endpoints. Option C. The degree of alignment between the monetary valuation results and the organization's publicly stated environmental performance targets, regardless of the valuation methodology. Option D. The extent to which the chosen valuation method minimizes the overall cost of conducting the environmental impact assessment for the organization. Correct answer is B. The robustness and comprehensiveness of the data used to estimate the physical quantity of pollutants and the scientific basis for the dose-response functions linking these quantities to health and environmental endpoints. Explanation. The core of ISO 14008-2019 is to provide a framework for the monetary valuation of environmental impacts. When an internal auditor assesses an organization's application of this standard, they must verify that the chosen valuation methods are appropriate for the specific environmental aspects being assessed, and that these methods align with the principles outlined in the standard. The standard emphasizes the importance of transparency, consistency, and the use of reliable data. For instance, when valuing the impact of greenhouse gas emissions, an auditor would look for the use of established methodologies like the social cost of carbon, considering its basis in scientific consensus and economic modeling, as referenced in various policy documents and academic literature that inform the standard's development. The auditor must also ensure that the chosen method's limitations are acknowledged and that the valuation results are presented with appropriate caveats. The selection of a valuation method should be driven by the specific environmental aspect, the intended use of the valuation, and the availability of relevant data, rather than solely on cost-effectiveness or ease of implementation, though these are secondary considerations. The auditor's role is to confirm that the process is robust and that the valuation is a meaningful representation of the environmental impact, adhering to the standard's guidance on selecting and applying appropriate techniques. Question 3. An internal auditor is reviewing an organization's environmental management system, specifically focusing on how life cycle assessment, LCA data, informs the identification of environmental aspects for monetary valuation purposes as stipulated by ISO 14008-2019. The organization utilizes a streamlined LCA approach that aggregates certain minor emissions into broader categories. Which critical deficiency would the auditor most likely identify if this aggregation obscures the potential for significant localized environmental impacts that could be monetarily valued? Option A. The organization has not established clear internal procedures for updating LCA databases with the latest scientific findings. Option B. The LCA methodology fails to adequately identify and characterize all relevant environmental aspects, potentially leading to an incomplete basis for monetary valuation. Option C. The scope definition of the LCA does not encompass the entire value chain of the product system under review. Option D. The monetary valuation model incorrectly applies a uniform global damage cost factor to all aggregated emission categories. The correct answer is B. The LCA methodology fails to adequately identify and characterize all relevant environmental aspects, potentially leading to an incomplete basis for monetary valuation. Explanation. The core of ISO 14008-2019 concerning the monetary valuation of environmental impacts hinges on the principle of identifying relevant environmental aspects and their associated impacts. Life cycle assessment, LCA, is a foundational tool for this identification process, as it systematically analyzes environmental burdens associated with a product, process, or service throughout its entire life cycle. When an internal auditor examines the use of LCA data for impact identification within an organization's environmental management system, they must verify that the LCA methodology employed aligns with recognized standards and effectively captures all significant environmental aspects. This includes ensuring that the scope of the LCA is appropriate for the intended valuation, and that the characterization factors used are robust and contextually relevant. The auditor's role is to confirm that the identified impacts are directly linked to the organization's activities, and that the subsequent monetary valuation is based on a transparent and defensible methodology, which might involve techniques like damage cost assessment or abatement cost estimation. The auditor must also ensure that the LCA data used for impact identification is sufficiently detailed and covers the entire life cycle relevant to the environmental aspects being valued, from raw material extraction to end-of-life disposal. The effectiveness of the monetary valuation process is directly dependent on the quality and completeness of the initial impact identification derived from the LCA. Question 4. When conducting an internal audit of an organization's application of ISO 14008-2019 for the monetary valuation of an anticipated reduction in particulate matter emissions from a manufacturing facility, which aspect of using stated preference methods, such as contingent valuation or choice modeling, would be of paramount importance for the auditor to scrutinize regarding the credibility of the valuation results? Option A, the total number of respondents participating in the survey, without considering their demographic representativeness or the survey's response rate. Option B, the statistical significance of the estimated coefficients in a regression analysis of the survey data, irrespective of the underlying survey design. Option C, the consistency of the valuation estimates with historical market prices for similar environmental improvements, even if those improvements were achieved through different mechanisms. Option D, the robustness of the survey instrument's design in minimizing hypothetical bias and ensuring clear communication of the environmental change to respondents. The correct answer is D, the robustness of the survey instrument's design in minimizing hypothetical bias and ensuring clear communication of the environmental change to respondents. Explanation. The question probes the understanding of how stated preference methods, specifically contingent valuation and choice modeling, are applied in the context of ISO 14008-2019 for internal auditing purposes. ISO 14008 emphasizes the monetary valuation of environmental impacts. Stated preference methods elicit willingness to pay, WTP, or willingness to accept, WTA, for environmental changes by directly asking individuals about their preferences. In contingent valuation, a hypothetical market is created to assess WTP for a specific environmental good or service. Choice modeling, on the other hand, presents respondents with a series of choices between different environmental attributes and their associated costs, allowing for the estimation of the marginal WTP for each attribute. An internal auditor assessing the application of ISO 14008 would need to verify that the chosen stated preference method is appropriate for the specific environmental impact being valued, that the survey design is robust and minimizes biases, e.g., strategic bias, information bias, hypothetical bias, and that the valuation estimates derived are credible and can be integrated into the organization's environmental management system for decision-making, such as cost-benefit analysis of mitigation measures or setting environmental performance targets. The auditor would also check if the method chosen aligns with the specific requirements for eliciting monetary values of environmental aspects as outlined in the standard, ensuring that the valuation framework supports the organization's environmental policy and objectives. Question 5. When conducting an internal audit of an organization's implementation of ISO 14008-2019, what is the primary focus of the auditor's review concerning the reporting of monetary valuation results for environmental impacts, specifically relating to the transparency and completeness of the documented process? Option A, assessing whether the report includes projections of future environmental performance improvements directly linked to the monetary valuation findings, even if not explicitly required by the standard's reporting clauses. Option B, ensuring the report clearly articulates the chosen valuation methods, data inputs, underlying assumptions, and any identified limitations, thereby facilitating a comprehensive understanding of the valuation's credibility. Option C, verifying that the monetary values presented in the report align with industry best practices for similar environmental impacts, regardless of the specific methodologies employed by the organization. Option D, confirming that the report exclusively utilizes quantitative data and avoids any qualitative descriptions of environmental impacts to maintain objectivity. The correct answer is B, ensuring the report clearly articulates the chosen valuation methods, data inputs, underlying assumptions, and any identified limitations, thereby facilitating a comprehensive understanding of the valuation's credibility. Explanation. ISO 14008-2019 mandates specific reporting requirements for the monetary valuation of environmental impacts. An internal auditor assessing an organization's adherence to this standard must verify that the reporting aligns with the principles and guidance provided. Clause 7 of ISO 14008-2019 outlines the reporting of the results of monetary valuation. This clause emphasizes the need for clarity, completeness, and transparency. Specifically, it requires that reports include a clear description of the environmental aspects and impacts being valued, the valuation methods employed, the data sources used, the assumptions made, and the limitations of the valuation. Furthermore, the report should present the results in a way that is understandable to the intended audience and allows for informed decision-making. When an auditor reviews the reporting, they are looking for evidence that all these elements are present and accurately conveyed. For instance, if an organization values the impact of greenhouse gas emissions using a social cost of carbon, the report must clearly state the chosen social cost of carbon value, the basis for its selection, e.g., a specific governmental guideline or scientific consensus, and any adjustments made. The auditor's role is to confirm that the reporting facilitates a comprehensive understanding of the valuation process and its outcomes, enabling stakeholders to assess the credibility and relevance of the monetary values assigned to environmental impacts, thereby supporting the organization's environmental management system. Question 6. An internal auditor for a multinational manufacturing firm, who is also a shareholder with a modest but non-controlling stake in the company, is assigned to audit the firm's recent implementation of a novel wastewater treatment technology and its associated monetary valuation of reduced effluent discharge impacts. The auditor previously provided consultative advice on the selection of the monitoring equipment for this technology 2 years ago, but has not been directly involved in its operational management or the financial reporting of its environmental benefits since then. Considering the principles of objectivity and independence as stipulated by ISO 14008-2019, what is the most critical factor that could potentially impair the auditor's impartiality in this specific scenario? Option A. The auditor's status as a shareholder, even with a non-controlling stake in the audited organization. Option B. The auditor's personal relationship with the plant manager responsible for the wastewater treatment operations. Option C. The auditor's prior consultative role in selecting monitoring equipment for the technology 2 years ago. Option D. The auditor's recent completion of an advanced course on environmental economics and valuation methodologies. The correct answer is C. The auditor's prior consultative role in selecting monitoring equipment for the technology 2 years ago. Explanation. ISO 14008-2019 emphasizes the importance of objectivity and independence for internal auditors conducting monetary valuations of environmental impacts. To maintain this crucial aspect, auditors must avoid situations that could compromise their impartiality. This includes having any direct financial interest in the organization being audited or in the specific environmental projects being evaluated. Furthermore, auditors should not have been involved in the design, implementation, or management of the environmental management system or the monetary valuation processes they are auditing for at least 2 years prior to the audit. This cooling-off period ensures that the auditor's perspective is not unduly influenced by prior involvement. Personal relationships that could create a bias, such as being a close relative of a key decision-maker responsible for the environmental valuation, also pose a threat to independence. The standard requires auditors to actively identify and manage any potential threats to their objectivity and independence, documenting the basis for their conclusion that independence is maintained. This proactive approach is fundamental to the credibility of the audit findings and the overall effectiveness of the environmental management system. Question 7. During an internal audit of a manufacturing firm's environmental management system, which specifically incorporates monetary valuation of environmental impacts as per ISO 14008-2019, an auditor is reviewing the valuation of the company's water usage. The firm operates a large textile dyeing facility that draws water from a local river. The audit team needs to differentiate between the monetary valuation of the river's reduced flow rate due to the facility's extraction and the monetary valuation of potential downstream agricultural impacts caused by altered water salinity levels resulting from the company's discharge, which, while treated, still contains trace elements. Which approach correctly categorizes these impacts for valuation purposes according to the standard's principles? Option A. Both the reduced river flow rate and the downstream agricultural impacts are considered direct impacts. Option B. Both the reduced river flow rate and the downstream agricultural impacts are considered indirect impacts. Option C. The reduced river flow rate is a direct impact, while the downstream agricultural impacts from altered salinity are indirect impacts. Option D. The reduced river flow rate is an indirect impact, while the downstream agricultural impacts from altered salinity are direct impacts. The correct answer is C. The reduced river flow rate is a direct impact, while the downstream agricultural impacts from altered salinity are indirect impacts. Explanation: ISO 14008-2019 establishes principles and requirements for the monetary valuation of environmental impacts. When conducting an internal audit of an organization's environmental management system that utilizes monetary valuation, an auditor must assess the methodology for distinguishing between direct and indirect environmental impacts. Direct impacts are those that are caused by an organization's activities, products, or services and occur at the site of the organization or directly affect its immediate environment. For instance, emissions from a factory's smokestack are a direct impact. Indirect impacts, on the other hand, are consequences that arise from an organization's activities but occur at a different location or time, or are a result of a chain of events. These can include impacts occurring in the upstream or downstream phases of a product's life cycle, or consequences stemming from policy changes influenced by the organization. An auditor's task is to verify that the valuation methodology correctly identifies and accounts for both categories of impacts, ensuring that the monetary valuation reflects the full scope of environmental performance. This involves scrutinizing the data collection, impact pathway analysis, and the selection of appropriate valuation techniques for each type of impact. For example, valuing the impact of a company's waste disposal on local groundwater quality is a direct impact, while valuing the impact of its product's end-of-life disposal in a distant landfill on ocean plastic pollution would be an indirect impact. The auditor must confirm that the chosen valuation methods are suitable for the specific nature and spatial temporal scale of each identified impact. Question 8. An internal auditor is reviewing an organization's environmental management system, specifically focusing on the application of ISO 14008-2019 for monetarily valuing environmental impacts. The organization has reported a 12% increase in revenue over the past fiscal year, alongside a 7% increase in the monetized value of its greenhouse gas emissions. The auditor needs to assess whether this scenario reflects progress towards decoupling economic growth from environmental impact. Which of the following conclusions most accurately reflects the auditor's likely finding regarding the relationship between economic growth and environmental sustainability in this context? Option A. The organization has achieved absolute decoupling, where economic growth occurs with a simultaneous absolute decrease in environmental impacts. Option B. The organization's environmental performance is stagnant, with no discernible relationship between economic growth and environmental impact. Option C. The organization is demonstrating a positive decoupling, as the percentage increase in revenue exceeds the percentage increase in monetized environmental impact. Option D. The organization is exhibiting a negative decoupling, indicating a strengthening of the link between economic growth and environmental degradation. The correct answer is C. The organization is demonstrating a positive decoupling, as the percentage increase in revenue exceeds the percentage increase in monetized environmental impact. Explanation: the question probes the auditor's understanding of how monetary valuation, as guided by ISO 14008, can reveal potential decoupling between economic growth and environmental degradation. Decoupling refers to breaking the link between economic activity and its environmental footprint. ISO 14008 provides a framework for internalizing environmental costs into decision-making. When an organization effectively implements monetary valuation of its environmental impacts, it can identify which operational aspects are disproportionately contributing to environmental externalities, even as the overall economic output increases. This allows for targeted interventions to reduce these impacts, thereby fostering a more sustainable growth trajectory. For instance, if a company's revenue grows by 10%, but its monetized environmental cost of water pollution also grows by 15%, this indicates a negative decoupling or a strengthening of the link. Conversely, if revenue grows by 10% and the monetized environmental cost of water pollution grows by only 5% or even decreases, this suggests a positive decoupling. An internal auditor assessing the effectiveness of ISO 14008 implementation would look for evidence that the monetary valuation process has led to informed strategic decisions aimed at reducing environmental impacts per unit of economic output. This process is crucial for demonstrating progress towards environmental sustainability goals within an economic growth context. Question 9. An internal auditor is assessing an organization's environmental statement that quantifies the monetary value of a specific ecosystem service degradation using a market-based approach. The service in question is the provision of clean water by a local watershed, which has been impacted by increased industrial effluent. The auditor needs to verify the appropriateness of the chosen valuation method, considering the principles of ISO 14008 and the nature of opportunity cost in market-based valuations, which market-based valuation method would most directly reflect the economic loss incurred by downstream communities who rely on this water for a specific commercial activity that is now diminished due to the effluent. Option A. Contingent valuation survey results estimating willingness to pay for improved water quality. Option B. Hedonic pricing of housing in areas with cleaner water compared to areas with impacted water. Option C. Cost to install advanced water filtration systems to treat the impacted water to a usable standard. Option D. Market price of a comparable, uncontaminated water source used for the same commercial activity. Correct answer is D. Market price of a comparable, uncontaminated water source used for the same commercial activity. Explanation. The question probes the internal auditor's understanding of selecting appropriate market-based valuation methods within the ISO 14008 framework, specifically concerning the concept of opportunity cost. Opportunity cost represents the value of the next best alternative foregone when a decision is made. In the context of environmental impacts, if a specific environmental good or service, like clean air or water, is being degraded, and there's a functioning market for a substitute or a related good that reflects its value, then the market price of that substitute can be a proxy for the opportunity cost of the degradation. For instance, if a factory pollutes a river, affecting downstream fishing, and there's an active market for commercially caught fish from a similar, unpolluted river, the market price of those fish could represent the lost economic value to the fishing community, thus reflecting an opportunity cost. Replacement cost, on the other hand, is the cost to replace an asset or service with one of similar utility. While related to economic valuation, it's more about restoration or mitigation costs rather than the direct economic loss due to the environmental impact itself, unless the replacement directly compensates for the foregone benefit. Hedonic pricing and contingent valuation are non-market valuation methods, distinct from the market-based approaches being considered here. Therefore, when an environmental impact directly affects a resource with a clear market price for a comparable substitute, the market price of that substitute is the most direct indicator of the opportunity cost. Question 10. During an internal audit of an organization's environmental management system, a nonconformity is identified concerning the monetary valuation of the greenhouse gas emissions from its primary manufacturing process. The audit finding indicates that the chosen valuation method for the social cost of carbon, SCC, was based on outdated provincial guidelines rather than the most recent, internationally recognized SCC estimates that reflect current scientific understanding and economic modeling, as stipulated by ISO 14008-2019. The auditor determined that this methodological choice resulted in a significant underestimation of the environmental cost. What corrective action planning element would most effectively address the root cause of this nonconformity and prevent its recurrence? Option A. Implement a system for the financial department to review all environmental valuation reports annually for accuracy. Option B. Issue a formal warning to the environmental manager for failing to adhere to the standards valuation principles. Option C. Revise the environmental impact assessment procedures to mandate the use of the most current, internationally accepted social cost of carbon estimates and provide training on their application. Option D. Conduct a follow-up audit in 6 months to verify if the organization has updated its provincial guidelines. Correct answer is C. Revise the environmental impact assessment procedures to mandate the use of the most current, internationally accepted social cost of carbon estimates and provide training on their application. Explanation. The core of corrective action planning in the context of ISO 14008 is to address nonconformities identified during an audit or through other monitoring processes. When a nonconformity related to the monetary valuation of environmental impacts is found, the internal auditor's role is to ensure that the root cause is identified and that effective corrective actions are planned and implemented. ISO 14008-2019 emphasizes the importance of a systematic approach to valuation, which includes data collection, method selection, and calculation. If an audit reveals that the chosen valuation method for a specific impact, such as the social cost of carbon emissions from a manufacturing facility, was inappropriately applied due to a misunderstanding of the underlying economic principles or the specific requirements of the standard, this represents a significant nonconformity. The corrective action plan must then focus on rectifying this methodological flaw. This would involve re-evaluating the impact using the correct methodology, retraining personnel involved in the valuation process, and potentially revising the documented procedures for future valuations. The goal is to prevent recurrence by addressing the root cause, which in this hypothetical scenario stems from an inadequate understanding or application of the valuation methodology itself. Therefore, the most appropriate corrective action is to ensure the correct application of the valuation methodology and the appropriate selection of data inputs and parameters, which directly addresses the identified flaw in the monetary valuation process. Question 11. During an internal audit of an organization's environmental management system, an auditor identifies a significant nonconformity where the monetary valuation for the emission of a particular greenhouse gas, as per ISO 14008-2019, was based on outdated market data for carbon credits, leading to an understated environmental cost. The organization proposes to update the valuation using current market data. What is the most appropriate next step for the internal auditor to verify the effectiveness of this proposed corrective action? Option A. Accept the organization's statement that the valuation will be updated and close the nonconformity, assuming the proposed action is sufficient. Option B. Review the revised monetary valuation report and any supporting documentation demonstrating the application of current market data, and confirm that the identified root cause of using outdated data has been addressed by procedural or training enhancements. Option C. Request the organization to perform a new monetary valuation for all identified environmental aspects, regardless of their materiality, to ensure consistency. Option D. Recommend a complete re-audit of the entire environmental management system, as the initial finding indicates systemic weaknesses in data management. Correct answer is B. Review the revised monetary valuation report and any supporting documentation demonstrating the application of current market data, and confirm that the identified root cause of using outdated data has been addressed by procedural or training enhancements. Explanation. When an internal auditor is assessing an organization's environmental management system for conformance with ISO 14008-2019, particularly concerning the management of nonconformities related to monetary valuation of environmental aspects, the auditor must verify that corrective actions are appropriate and effective. A nonconformity arises when an environmental aspect's monetary valuation process deviates from the standard's requirements or the organization's own documented procedures. For instance, if a valuation method chosen for a specific pollutant release was not adequately justified, or if the data used in the valuation was found to be incomplete or unreliable, this would constitute a nonconformity. The auditor's role is to ensure that the root cause of this deviation is identified. Following root cause identification, the organization must implement corrective actions. These actions should not merely address the immediate symptom, but aim to prevent recurrence. In the context of ISO 14008, this means ensuring the chosen valuation methodologies are robust, data collection processes are sound, and personnel are adequately trained in applying these principles. The auditor evaluates the effectiveness of these corrective actions by reviewing evidence of implementation and assessing whether the nonconformity has been resolved and is unlikely to recur. This involves examining updated procedures, training records, revised valuation reports, and potentially reperforming parts of the valuation to confirm accuracy. The ultimate goal is to ensure the integrity and reliability of the monetary valuation of environmental impacts as required by the standard. Question 12. When conducting an internal audit of an organization's environmental management system that incorporates monetary valuation of environmental aspects, according to ISO 14008-2019, An auditor is reviewing the valuation of noise pollution emanating from a manufacturing facility, impacting a nearby residential community. Which valuation approach would be most aligned with the standard's guidance for capturing the full spectrum of impacts, including disamenity effects and potential health-related consequences, in a direct manner? Option A. Travel cost methods to assess the economic value of accessing areas with lower noise pollution. Option B. Hedonic pricing models that analyze property value differentials in relation to noise levels. Option C. Stated preference methods, such as contingent valuation or choice experiments, to elicit willingness to pay for noise reduction. Option D. Cost of illness methods to quantify the direct medical expenses associated with noise-induced health problems. The correct answer is C. Stated preference methods, such as contingent valuation or choice experiments, to elicit willingness to pay for noise reduction. Explanation. The core principle of ISO 14008-2019 is to provide a framework for the monetary valuation of environmental impacts. When considering noise pollution, the standard emphasizes the importance of selecting appropriate valuation methods that reflect the specific nature of the impact and the context of its occurrence. For noise pollution, which primarily affects human well-being through annoyance, sleep disturbance, and potential health impacts, a key consideration is the willingness to pay WTP for noise reduction, or the willingness to accept WTA compensation for noise exposure. These methods fall under the category of stated preference techniques, while hedonic pricing, using market data to infer value, can be applied to property values affected by noise. It is often less direct for noise pollution itself compared to other environmental impacts like air pollution or water quality. Travel cost methods are generally used for valuing recreational or amenity sites, which is not directly applicable to the impact of noise pollution on residential areas or workplaces. Cost of illness methods focus on health impacts, which is a component of noise pollution's valuation, but not the entirety of its valuation, which also includes non-health-related disamenities. Therefore, stated preference methods, particularly contingent valuation or choice experiments designed to elicit WTP for noise reduction, are often the most direct and comprehensive approach for valuing noise pollution under ISO 14008, especially when considering its multifaceted impact on quality of life. Question 13. During an internal audit of an organization's environmental management system, which economic instrument for environmental protection, as discussed in the context of ISO 14008-2019, most directly facilitates the internalization of negative externalities by setting a price equivalent to the marginal external cost at the socially optimal output level? Option A. Pigouvian tax. Option B. Subsidy for green technology adoption. Option C. Tradable pollution permits. Option D. Voluntary industry agreements. The correct answer is A. Pigouvian tax. Explanation. The core principle of ISO 14008-2019 is to provide a framework for the monetary valuation of environmental impacts. When considering economic instruments for environmental protection, an internal auditor assessing compliance with this standard would focus on how these instruments align with the objective of internalizing environmental costs. A Pigouvian tax is designed to correct negative externalities by setting the tax equal to the marginal external cost at the socially optimal level of output. This directly addresses the internalization of environmental costs, a key aspect of monetary valuation. For instance, if a factory pollutes a river, a Pigouvian tax would aim to capture the cost of that pollution to society, e.g., reduced fishing yields, water treatment costs, and impose it on the factory. This aligns with the standard's intent to reflect the true cost of activities. Subsidies, while an economic instrument, are typically used to encourage positive externalities or support environmentally friendly activities, rather than directly internalizing negative externalities. Tradable permits, cap-and-trade systems, create a market for pollution rights, which can lead to efficient pollution reduction, but the initial allocation and subsequent trading mechanisms are distinct from the direct cost internalization principle of a Pigouvian tax, which is more directly aligned with the valuation aspect of ISO 14008. Voluntary agreements, while useful, do not inherently involve the direct monetary valuation of impacts in the same structured way as a Pigouvian tax or a well-designed cap-and-trade system. Therefore, a Pigouvian tax most directly embodies the principle of internalizing environmental costs for monetary valuation. Question 14. When conducting an internal audit of an organization's environmental impact monetary valuation process, as per ISO 14008-2019, what is the primary focus of the auditor's evidence gathering concerning the data used for quantifying environmental aspects? Option A. Verifying the comprehensiveness of the data collected and its direct relevance to the identified environmental aspects and chosen valuation methodologies. Option B. Ensuring that the data used is readily available from public databases, regardless of its specific applicability to the organization's context. Option C. Assessing the historical trends of environmental performance data without a specific focus on its suitability for monetary valuation. Option D. Confirming that the data collection methods align with general environmental management system requirements outlined in ISO 14001-2015. Correct answer is A. Verifying the comprehensiveness of the data collected and its direct relevance to the identified environmental aspects and chosen valuation methodologies. Explanation. The core principle of ISO 14008-2019 concerning data collection for monetary valuation of environmental impacts is the need for data to be relevant, reliable, and appropriate for the chosen valuation method. For an internal auditor, verifying the robustness of the data collection process involves assessing whether the data gathered directly supports the identification and quantification of environmental aspects and their subsequent monetary valuation. This requires looking beyond mere data availability to the quality and suitability of the data for the specific valuation techniques employed. For instance, if a damage cost approach is used for air pollution, data on emission concentration, population exposure, and established dose-response functions are critical. For replacement cost approach is used for water scarcity, data on water extraction volumes, treatment costs, and alternative water sources would be necessary. The auditor must confirm that the data sources are credible, the collection methods are systematic, and any assumptions made during data collection are documented and justifiable in relation to the valuation objectives. This ensures the integrity of the entire monetary valuation process, aligning with the standard's emphasis on transparency and defensibility. The auditor's role is to provide assurance that the foundation of the monetary valuation, the data, is sound. Question 15. When initiating an internal audit for an organization's application of ISO 14008-2019, which critical element must be definitively established to ensure the audit effectively assesses the monetary valuation of environmental impacts and related aspects? Option A. An exhaustive review of all external stakeholder feedback on the organization's environmental reporting, regardless of its connection to monetary valuation. Option B. A comprehensive list of all environmental regulations the organization is subject to, without regard to their direct relevance to monetary valuation. Option C. A precise definition of the audit's boundaries, including the specific environmental aspects, valuation methods, data sources, and timeframes to be examined. Option D. A preliminary assessment of the organization's overall environmental performance, independent of the monetary valuation process. The correct answer is C. A precise definition of the audit's boundaries, including the specific environmental aspects, valuation methods, data sources, and timeframes to be examined. Explanation. The scope of an internal audit for monetary valuation of environmental impacts, as per ISO 14008-2019, must clearly define the boundaries and focus of the audit. This includes identifying the specific environmental aspects and impacts that will be subject to monetary valuation, the time period for which the valuation is being conducted, and the particular valuation methods and data sources that will be reviewed. The objectives of the audit should be aligned with the organization's environmental management system and its commitment to understanding and managing the financial implications of its environmental performance. For an internal auditor, ensuring that the scope is sufficiently detailed to cover the application of ISO 14008-2019, including the appropriateness of chosen valuation techniques, e.g., market-based methods, revealed preference, stated preference, and the reliability of the underlying data, is paramount. This also involves verifying that the audit covers the integration of these valuations into the organization's decision-making processes and reporting. The scope should also consider the relevant legal and regulatory frameworks that may influence the valuation of environmental impacts, such as emissions trading schemes or environmental taxes, ensuring that the audit assesses compliance and effectiveness in this regard. The objective is to provide assurance on the integrity and utility of the monetary valuation process. Question 16. During an internal audit of an organization's environmental management system that incorporates monetary valuation of environmental impacts, according to ISO 14008-2019, the auditor is assessing the effectiveness of the valuation process for a significant air quality impact. The organization has chosen a travel cost method for valuing the impact of increased particulate matter on recreational use of a nearby national park. Which of the following would be the most critical area for the auditor to investigate to verify the effectiveness of this monetary valuation? Option A. The extent to which the organization has publicized the monetary valuation results to external stakeholders, such as local community groups and regulatory bodies. Option B. The robustness of the data collection methodology for visitor origin and frequency, and the appropriateness of the distance-based cost estimations used in the travel cost model. Option C. The historical trend analysis of the organization's environmental expenditure, comparing it to the monetary valuations derived for various environmental aspects. Option D. The correlation between the calculated monetary value of the air quality impact and the organization's overall financial performance metrics. The correct answer is B. The robustness of the data collection methodology for visitor origin and frequency, and the appropriateness of the distance-based cost estimations used in the travel cost model. Explanation: the effectiveness of a monetary valuation system for environmental impacts, as outlined by ISO 14008-2019, is primarily verified by assessing whether the valuations accurately reflect the chosen valuation methods and data inputs, and if these valuations are consistently applied to inform decision-making. This involves reviewing the internal audit process to ensure it scrutinizes the appropriateness of the selected valuation techniques, e.g., revealed preference, stated preference, or cost-based methods, against the specific environmental aspects being valued and the context of the organization. The audit should also confirm that the data used for these valuations is reliable, relevant, and sourced appropriately, adhering to principles of transparency and traceability. Furthermore, a key aspect of effectiveness is the demonstrable use of these monetary valuations in influencing strategic planning, investment decisions, or the development of environmental management programs, thereby contributing to improved environmental performance. The internal auditor's role is to ascertain that the system is not merely a theoretical exercise, but a practical tool that guides actions and achieves intended environmental outcomes, aligning with the overarching goals of the environmental management system. This verification process includes checking for any biases in the valuation process and ensuring that the results are communicated effectively to relevant stakeholders for informed decision-making. Question 17. During an internal audit of an organization's environmental management system that incorporates monetary valuation of impacts, as per ISO 14008-2019, the auditor is reviewing the valuation of a significant increase in particulate matter emissions from a manufacturing plant. The organization has chosen to use the hedonic pricing method, which analyzes the relationship between property values and environmental factors in affected residential areas. Which of the following considerations would be most critical for the auditor to verify regarding the appropriateness of this chosen valuation method in accordance with ISO 14008 principles? Option A. Whether the statistical model used to isolate the effect of particulate matter from other property value determinants, such as crime rates and school quality, is robust and has been validated against independent data sources. Option B. Whether the organization has documented the specific types of particulate matter, such as PM2.5 or PM10, that were included in the hedonic pricing model, ensuring alignment with the most relevant health impact assessments. Option C. Whether the organization has also considered using contingent valuation to survey residents about their willingness to pay for a reduction in particulate matter, even though the hedonic pricing method was selected as the primary approach. Option D. Whether the organization has obtained explicit consent from all affected property owners to use their property transaction data for the hedonic pricing analysis, as required by data privacy regulations. The correct answer is A. Whether the statistical model used to isolate the effect of particulate matter from other property value determinants, such as crime rates and school quality, is robust and has been validated against independent data sources. Explanation: when auditing an organization's application of ISO 14008-2019, an internal auditor must assess the appropriateness of the chosen monetary valuation methods for specific environmental impacts. The standard outlines several approaches, including market-based methods, revealed preference methods, and stated preference methods. The selection of an appropriate method depends on the nature of the environmental impact, the availability and reliability of data, and the intended use of the valuation. For impacts like localized air pollution affecting human health, market-based methods such as the avoided cost approach e.g., cost of medical treatment, or the hedonic pricing method e.g., property value differences related to air quality, are often suitable. Revealed preference methods like travel cost models for recreational sites impacted by pollution can also be applied. Stated preference methods, such as contingent valuation or choice experiments, are typically used for non-market goods or impacts where direct market observation is impossible, such as valuing the preservation of a rare species or the aesthetic impact of a new industrial facility on a landscape. An auditor would verify that the chosen method aligns with the impact's characteristics and that the data used is robust and relevant, considering potential biases inherent in each method. For instance, if the organization valued the impact of increased greenhouse gas emissions on climate change using only a carbon tax, an auditor would question the sufficiency of this approach. As ISO 14008 encourages a broader consideration of impacts and potentially multiple valuation techniques to capture different facets of the environmental change and its consequences. The auditor's role is to ensure that the valuation process is systematic, transparent, and defensible, adhering to the principles laid out in the standard for internal consistency and comparability where applicable. Question 18. An internal auditor is reviewing an organization's environmental impact valuation report, which uses a combination of primary data from field studies and secondary data from government environmental agencies to estimate the monetary value of air pollution impacts. The auditor notes that some of the secondary data on emission factors for a particular industrial process are several years old and were collected under different regulatory frameworks. What is the most critical data quality consideration for the auditor in this scenario, according to the principles of ISO 14008-2019 for monetary valuation? Option A. The cost incurred by the organization in acquiring the secondary data from government agencies. Option B. The total number of different air pollutants considered in the valuation, irrespective of data quality. Option C. The specific statistical methods used to aggregate the primary field study data for the air pollution impacts. Option D. The representativeness and timeliness of the secondary emission factor data in relation to current operational conditions and regulatory environment. The correct answer is D. The representativeness and timeliness of the secondary emission factor data in relation to current operational conditions and regulatory environment. Explanation: in the context of ISO 14008-2019, an internal auditor assessing the monetary valuation of environmental impacts must rigorously evaluate the quality of the input data used for these valuations. This involves scrutinizing the reliability, accuracy, and appropriateness of the data sources and collection methods. For instance, if a valuation relies on market prices for a pollutant's abatement, the auditor must verify if these prices are current, representative of the relevant market, and not subject to artificial distortions. Similarly, if contingent valuation methods are employed to estimate willingness to pay for environmental improvements, the auditor needs to assess the survey design, respondent selection, and statistical analysis to ensure validity and minimize bias. Critical aspect is understanding the scope and limitations of the data, recognizing potential gaps or uncertainties, and how these might influence the resulting monetary values. The auditor's role is to ensure that the data quality assessment aligns with the principles outlined in ISO 14008-2019, specifically regarding the transparency and justification of data choices to support credible environmental impact valuations. This includes checking for consistency in data application across different impact categories and ensuring that any data transformations or estimations are clearly documented and defensible. Question 19. An internal auditor is reviewing an organization's environmental management system, which aims to comply with ISO 14008-2019 for monetary valuation of environmental impacts. The organization has identified a significant non-market environmental impact, the degradation of a local wetland's biodiversity due to a new industrial discharge. The organization has commissioned a study to determine the monetary value of this impact, which valuation methodology, fundamentally rooted in environmental economics, will be most directly employed to elicit the public's perceived value of preserving the wetland's biodiversity, considering the absence of direct market transactions for such ecological services. Option A, contingent valuation. Option B, hedonic pricing. Option C, travel cost method. Option D, replacement cost approach. The correct answer is A, contingent valuation. Explanation: the core of environmental economics in the context of ISO 14008-2019 lies in understanding how to quantify the economic value of environmental impacts. This standard emphasizes the use of monetary valuation techniques to integrate environmental costs and benefits into decision-making processes. When an internal auditor examines an organization's environmental management system, they must assess the appropriateness and rigor of the monetary valuation methods employed. The concept of contingent valuation is a stated preference technique that directly asks individuals about their willingness to pay WTP for environmental improvements or their willingness to accept WTA, compensation for environmental degradation. This method is particularly relevant when market prices for environmental goods or services are absent. For instance, valuing the aesthetic loss of a scenic view due to industrial pollution would likely require a contingent valuation study. Other methods like hedonic pricing, travel cost, or market-based approaches, e.g., emissions trading, are also important, but contingent valuation directly addresses the subjective value placed on non-market environmental attributes, making it a key area for an auditor to verify the robustness of the valuation process. The auditor's role is to ensure that the chosen valuation methods are suitable for the specific environmental impacts being assessed, and that the data collection and analysis are scientifically sound, adhering to principles of environmental economics and relevant guidance documents that inform ISO 14008. Question 20. An internal auditor reviewing an organization's environmental impact valuation report, which utilized a benefit transfer approach for assessing the economic consequences of a proposed industrial discharge on a local freshwater ecosystem, needs to evaluate the robustness of the transfer. The organization selected a study valuing recreational fishing losses in a different region with distinct water quality parameters and socio-economic conditions. What critical factors should the auditor primarily focus on to determine the validity of this benefit transfer, according to the principles outlined in ISO 14008-2019 for monetary valuation? Option A, the specific statistical software used by the original researchers to analyze their primary data for the source study. Option B, the total number of studies available globally that have previously estimated monetary values for water quality degradation. Option C, the perceived political acceptability of the valuation figures derived from the benefit transfer in the target region. Option D, the degree of similarity between the environmental good/service and the affected population in the source study and the target context, and the appropriateness of any adjustments made. The correct answer is D, the degree of similarity between the environmental good/service and the affected population in the source study and the target context, and the appropriateness of any adjustments made. Explanation: the benefit transfer method is a technique used in environmental economics to estimate the economic value of environmental goods and services. It involves using existing studies on similar environmental impacts or goods in different locations or contexts to derive values for a new situation. This method is particularly useful when primary data collection is too costly or time-consuming. ISO 14008-2019, which provides guidance on the monetary valuation of environmental impacts, recognizes benefit transfer as a valid approach, but emphasizes the importance of careful application and consideration of its limitations. Key to a successful benefit transfer is the selection of relevant and robust source studies. The transferability of benefits is influenced by factors such as the similarity of the environmental good or service, the affected population, the policy context, and the valuation methods used in the original study. When conducting an internal audit of a monetary valuation process that employs benefit transfer, an auditor would scrutinize the justification for selecting specific source studies and the adjustments made to account for differences between the source and target contexts. The auditor would also verify that the limitations of the benefit transfer method, such as the potential for errors due to unobserved differences or the specific characteristics of the site being valued, are adequately acknowledged and addressed in the valuation report. The goal is to ensure that the valuation is credible and supports sound environmental management decisions, in line with the principles of ISO 14008. Question 21. An internal auditor is reviewing a monetary valuation of the environmental impacts associated with a new manufacturing process for biodegradable packaging. The valuation relies on data derived from a life cycle assessment (LCA) study. What is the primary criterion the auditor must ensure regarding the LCA data's application for impact identification within the context of ISO 14008-2019? Option A. The LCA data accurately reflects the environmental impacts directly attributable to the functional unit and is relevant to the defined scope of the monetary valuation. Option B. The LCA data is sourced from publicly available databases, prioritizing broad applicability over specific process relevance. Option C. The LCA data focuses exclusively on end-of-life impacts, as these are typically the most significant for biodegradable materials. Option D. The LCA data utilizes the most advanced and complex characterization models available, regardless of their direct relevance to the specific impacts being monetized. The correct answer is A. The LCA data accurately reflects the environmental impacts directly attributable to the functional unit and is relevant to the defined scope of the monetary valuation. Explanation. The core principle of ISO 14008-2019 concerning the use of life cycle assessment, LCA data for impact identification in monetary valuation, is to ensure that the identified environmental impacts are directly linked to the functional unit and are relevant to the scope of the valuation. LCA, as a methodology, systematically assesses the environmental burdens associated with all stages of a product's life, from raw material extraction through materials processing, manufacture, distribution, use, repair and maintenance, and disposal or recycling. When applying LCA data for monetary valuation, an internal auditor must verify that the LCA study used as a basis for valuation has followed established LCA principles, e.g., ISO 14040 and ISO 14044. The identification of impacts must be comprehensive, covering all significant environmental categories relevant to the product system and the defined goal and scope of the monetary valuation. This includes ensuring that the selection of impact categories and characterization factors is appropriate and that the data used is of sufficient quality and relevance. For instance, if a valuation focuses on the operational phase of a product, the LCA data should accurately reflect the environmental impacts occurring during that specific phase, such as energy consumption and emissions. The auditor's role is to confirm that the LCA data is not only technically sound, but also appropriately mapped to the monetary valuation framework, ensuring that the identified impacts are indeed those for which monetary values are being assigned. This involves scrutinizing the data's completeness, the methodology for impact assessment, and the linkage between the LCA results and the chosen valuation techniques, such as cost of illness, contingent valuation, or replacement cost. The auditor must ensure that the LCA data directly supports the identification of environmental aspects that can be monetarily valued, adhering to the principles of transparency and relevance, as outlined in ISO 14008. Question 22. An internal audit of an organization's environmental management system, adhering to ISO 14008-2019, revealed a substantial difference in the monetary valuation of volatile organic compound, VOC, emissions from a manufacturing process. The initial valuation, derived from a cost of abatement analysis, yielded a significantly lower monetary value compared to subsequent valuations employing a damage cost assessment and a contingent valuation survey. What is the most likely root cause for this divergence in the monetary valuation of the VOC emissions? Option A. Overestimation of the abatement costs associated with reducing VOC emissions by the operations team. Option B. The damage cost assessment failed to account for the temporal discounting of future environmental damages. Option C. Inadequate consideration of the full spectrum of environmental externalities and their associated economic consequences in the initial valuation method. Option D. The contingent valuation survey data was collected from a sample group that did not accurately represent the affected population. The correct answer is C. Inadequate consideration of the full spectrum of environmental externalities and their associated economic consequences in the initial valuation method. Explanation. The scenario describes an internal audit of an organization's environmental management system, specifically focusing on the application of ISO 14008-2019 for monetary valuation of environmental impacts. The audit identified a significant discrepancy in the calculated monetary value of a specific environmental aspect, the release of volatile organic compounds, VOC, from a solvent-based coating process. The initial valuation, based on a direct cost of abatement approach, resulted in a significantly lower monetary value than subsequent valuations using a damage cost approach and a contingent valuation survey. The root cause analysis aims to uncover the fundamental reason for this discrepancy. When performing a root cause analysis for such a discrepancy in monetary valuation, according to ISO 14008-2019, an internal auditor must consider the methodologies prescribed and the potential for misapplication or incomplete data. ISO 14008-2019 emphasizes the selection of appropriate valuation methods and the quality of data used. A discrepancy between a direct cost of abatement and damage cost/contingent valuation methods often points to an incomplete understanding or calculation of the full environmental externalities. The cost of abatement method focuses on the cost to reduce or prevent the impact, which may not fully capture the societal or ecological costs incurred if the impact does occur. Conversely, damage cost and contingent valuation methods attempt to quantify these broader costs. In this case, the discrepancy suggests that the initial valuation might have overlooked or underestimated the actual damage caused by VOC emissions, which could include health impacts, ecosystem degradation, or contributions to smog formation, all of which have associated societal costs not directly reflected in the abatement cost. Therefore, the most probable root cause is the insufficient consideration of the full range of environmental externalities and their associated economic impacts when selecting and applying the valuation method. This points to a potential flaw in the initial selection or application of the valuation methodology, where a method that better captures the broader consequences, like damage costs or stated preferences, was not adequately prioritized or its data inputs were not robust enough. The auditor's role is to identify that the chosen method did not fully encompass the scope of impacts as required for a comprehensive monetary valuation. Question 23. An internal auditor is reviewing an organization's environmental impact assessment that utilizes monetary valuation techniques as per ISO 14008-2019. The organization operates a facility near a protected wetland, and a key environmental aspect identified is the potential for increased nutrient runoff impacting biodiversity. The auditor needs to ascertain how effectively the organization has incorporated the values and concerns of the local community and environmental advocacy groups regarding the wetlands preservation into the monetary valuation of this impact. Which of the following auditor findings would most strongly indicate robust adherence to the principles of stakeholder value integration within the monetary valuation process? Option A. The valuation study references academic literature on the economic value of wetlands, but does not demonstrate any direct engagement with stakeholders or any adaptation of valuation techniques based on their specific concerns about the facility's operations. Option B. The organization's valuation model primarily relies on the replacement cost of nutrient removal from water bodies, a method commonly accepted in the industry, with no explicit outreach to external stakeholders documented. Option C. The valuation report explicitly details methods used to solicit and incorporate feedback from local residents and environmental NGOs, with specific adjustments made to the contingent valuation survey design based on their input, and these adjustments are clearly justified in the methodology section. Option D. The environmental impact assessment mentions that community meetings were held, but the minutes indicate discussions were general and did not specifically inform the parameters or methods used in the monetary valuation of nutrient runoff. Correct answer is C. The valuation report explicitly details methods used to solicit and incorporate feedback from local residents and environmental NGOs, with specific adjustments made to the contingent valuation survey design based on their input, and these adjustments are clearly justified in the methodology section. Explanation. The core of incorporating stakeholder values into monetary valuation under ISO 14008-2019 lies in the systematic identification and integration of perspectives that may not be directly captured by market prices or readily available economic data. This standard emphasizes that monetary valuation is not solely an exercise in assigning monetary figures to environmental impacts, but also a process that should reflect societal preferences and ethical considerations. When an internal auditor assesses an organization's adherence to ISO 14008, they must verify that the methodology used for valuation includes mechanisms to gather and consider input from relevant stakeholders, such as local communities, non-governmental organizations, and affected individuals. This often involves qualitative assessments, surveys, focus groups, or expert consultations, which then inform the selection of appropriate valuation methods or the adjustment of existing ones. The goal is to ensure that the resulting monetary values are robust, credible, and representative of a broader societal understanding of an environmental impact's significance, rather than just its direct economic cost or benefit. This process is crucial for informed decision-making and for building trust with those affected by the organization's activities. The auditor's role is to confirm that this integration is documented and consistently applied. Question 24. An internal auditor reviewing an organization's environmental statement, which includes a monetary valuation of the impact of a new manufacturing process on a local river ecosystem, identifies that the valuation for the loss of recreational fishing opportunities was derived using a travel cost method. However, the auditor also notes that the valuation did not explicitly account for the non-use values associated with the river's biodiversity, which are considered significant by local environmental groups. According to the principles outlined in ISO 14008-2019 concerning the limitations of monetary valuation, what is the primary concern the auditor should raise regarding this valuation? Option A. The auditor should question the use of any monetary valuation for recreational impacts, as these are subjective and cannot be quantified. Option B. The organization failed to adhere to regulatory requirements for environmental impact assessment by not including a cost-benefit analysis for the new process. Option C. The valuation may underestimate the total environmental cost by omitting non-market values not captured by the travel cost method. Option D. The travel cost method is inherently flawed for valuing impacts on aquatic ecosystems, regardless of other factors considered. The correct answer is C. The valuation may underestimate the total environmental cost by omitting non-market values not captured by the travel cost method. Explanation. ISO 14008-2019 acknowledges that while monetary valuation can be a powerful tool for understanding and communicating the significance of environmental impacts, it is not without its inherent limitations. These limitations arise from the complexity of environmental systems, the difficulty in assigning precise economic values to certain environmental services or damages, and the potential for subjective biases in valuation methodologies. For instance, valuing the aesthetic degradation of a natural landscape or the loss of biodiversity can be highly challenging, as these impacts may not have readily observable market prices. Furthermore, the standard emphasizes that monetary valuation should be used in conjunction with other assessment methods and should not be seen as a definitive or exhaustive representation of an environmental impact's true value. The process of selecting appropriate valuation techniques, such as contingent valuation, choice experiments, or hedonic pricing, involves significant judgment and depends on the specific context, data availability, and the intended use of the valuation results. The standard guides auditors to critically assess the appropriateness and robustness of the chosen methods and the assumptions underpinning the valuation, recognizing that different methods can yield different results and that uncertainty is an intrinsic aspect of environmental valuation. The ultimate goal is to ensure that the monetary valuation process is transparent, well documented, and used responsibly within the broader environmental management framework, providing insights rather than absolute truths. Question 25. During an internal audit of an organization's environmental management system, an auditor is reviewing a nonconformity related to an overestimation of the monetary value of a significant environmental aspect, specifically the cost associated with hazardous waste treatment. The root cause analysis identified a deficiency in the data collection process for waste volumes. The corrective action implemented involved a new automated system for tracking waste generation and a revised data verification protocol. To assess the effectiveness of this CAPA, what is the most appropriate primary indicator the auditor should seek evidence of? Option A. An increase in the frequency of internal audits focusing on waste management processes. Option B. A documented decrease in the number of regulatory noncompliance incidents concerning waste disposal. Option C. A statistically significant reduction in the reported monetary valuation of hazardous waste treatment costs, directly attributable to more accurate waste volume data. Option D. The development of new environmental performance indicators unrelated to waste treatment costs. The correct answer is C. A statistically significant reduction in the reported monetary valuation of hazardous waste treatment costs, directly attributable to more accurate waste volume data. Explanation. The effectiveness of a corrective action preventive action, CAPA, is evaluated by determining if the root cause of a nonconformity has been addressed and if the corrective action has prevented recurrence. In the context of ISO 14008, which focuses on monetary valuation of environmental impacts, an internal auditor would assess CAPA effectiveness by examining whether the implemented corrective actions have demonstrably reduced or eliminated the identified environmental impact's monetary valuation. This involves reviewing data before and after the CAPA implementation. For instance, if a nonconformity was identified as an unexpected increase in the cost of waste disposal due to improper segregation, leading to higher treatment fees, the auditor would look for evidence that the CAPA, e.g., enhanced training on waste segregation, revised waste management procedures, resulted in a quantifiable reduction in these disposal costs. The auditor would compare the monetary valuation of the environmental aspect, waste disposal costs, pre-CAPA with the post-CAPA valuation. A successful CAPA would show a statistically significant decrease in the monetary valuation of the environmental aspect, directly linked to the corrective actions taken. This aligns with the principles of continuous improvement inherent in environmental management systems and the objective of ISO 14008 to manage and reduce the financial implications of environmental performance. The auditor must verify that the actions taken address the root cause and that the observed reduction in monetary valuation is a direct consequence of these actions, not due to other external factors. Question 26. During an internal audit of an organization's environmental management system that incorporates monetary valuation of environmental impacts according to ISO 14008-2019, an auditor reviews the process for valuing the impact of increased particulate matter emissions from a new industrial process. The organization has chosen a revealed preference method. What is the primary consideration for the auditor when evaluating the appropriateness of this choice for this specific environmental impact? Option A. Whether the revealed preference method adequately captures the non-use values associated with the air quality degradation. Option B. Whether the organization has utilized a stated preference method, such as contingent valuation, to directly elicit willingness to pay for improved air quality. Option C. Whether the organization has conducted a comprehensive life cycle assessment of the particulate matter emissions. Option D. Whether the organization has adequately documented the regulatory compliance requirements for air quality standards in the region. The correct answer is A. Whether the revealed preference method adequately captures the non-use values associated with the air quality degradation. Explanation. The core principle of ISO 14008-2019 is to provide a framework for the monetary valuation of environmental impacts. This involves identifying relevant environmental aspects and their associated impacts, selecting appropriate valuation methods, and then applying these methods to quantify the monetary value of these impacts. The standard emphasizes the importance of transparency, consistency, and comparability in the valuation process. When an internal auditor is assessing an organization's adherence to ISO 14008, they must verify that the chosen valuation methods are suitable for the specific environmental impacts being assessed, and that the data used for the valuation is reliable and robust. Furthermore, the auditor needs to ensure that the results of the monetary valuation are communicated effectively and used appropriately in decision-making processes, such as environmental management system improvements or investment decisions. The standard does not mandate a single valuation method, but rather guides the selection of appropriate methods based on the context, data availability, and the intended use of the valuation. For instance, if an organization is assessing the impact of water pollution from its manufacturing processes, the auditor would check if methods like contingent valuation, travel cost method, or damage cost methods were considered and appropriately applied, along with the justification for the chosen approach. The auditor's role is to confirm that the process aligns with the standard's requirements for systematic identification, measurement, and reporting of monetary values of environmental impacts. Question 27. Consider a scenario where an internal audit team is scheduled to review the monetary valuation of environmental impacts conducted by an organization for compliance with ISO 14008. One auditor on the team, MS. Anya Sharma, was previously involved in the data gathering and preliminary analysis phase for several of these valuations. To uphold the principles of objectivity and independence crucial for an ISO 14008 internal audit, which of the following actions is most critical for the audit team to implement? Option A. Allow MS. Sharma to proceed with the audit as planned, focusing solely on the final output of the monetary valuation and disregarding her prior data analysis role. Option B. Reassign MS. Sharma to audit different environmental aspects or a different stage of the valuation process that does not involve reviewing her prior work. Option C. Have MS. Sharma conduct the audit of her previously analyzed data, but with an additional senior auditor providing oversight and review. Option D. Request MS. Sharma to provide a written declaration stating her impartiality and commitment to objective assessment despite her prior involvement. The correct answer is B. Reassign MS. Sharma to audit different environmental aspects or a different stage of the valuation process that does not involve reviewing her prior work. Explanation. The core principle of auditor objectivity and independence, as applied to ISO 14008, requires that the auditor's judgment not be compromised by undue influence or bias. When an auditor is tasked with assessing the monetary valuation of environmental impacts, particularly when those valuations are directly linked to the organization's financial performance or strategic decisions, potential threats to independence can arise. A self-review threat occurs when an auditor is asked to audit work they previously performed or were involved in. In this scenario, if an auditor participated in the initial data collection or analysis for the environmental impact valuations, auditing those same valuations would place them in a position of reviewing their own previous work. This creates a significant risk that they might overlook errors or fail to challenge their own findings objectively. Therefore, to maintain independence, the auditor should not be involved in the process of developing the monetary valuations they are subsequently auditing. Other threats, such as self-interest, e.g., receiving a bonus based on the positive outcome of the valuation, or intimidation, e.g., pressure from management to reach a certain valuation, are also important, but the self-review threat is most directly implicated when an auditor audits their own prior work. The goal is to ensure the audit process is impartial and the resulting report reflects an unbiased assessment, thereby enhancing the credibility of the environmental impact valuation process as per ISO 14008 guidelines. Question 28. During an internal audit of an organization's environmental impact monetary valuation system, an auditor is assessing the process for identifying applicable environmental laws and regulations. The organization operates in a region with stringent regulations on industrial wastewater discharge, including specific monetary penalties for exceeding permissible pollutant concentrations. Additionally, there is a national policy encouraging voluntary carbon offsetting schemes. Which of the following categories of laws and regulations would be most critical for the auditor to verify are being appropriately incorporated into the monetary valuation framework, considering the direct financial implications and the standard's emphasis on quantifiable impacts? Option A. Legislation and regulations that establish specific financial penalties or compensation mechanisms for environmental damage or non-compliance with environmental standards. Option B. International agreements on climate change mitigation that are not yet fully transposed into national legislation with specific monetary enforcement. Option C. National guidelines and industry best practices for corporate social responsibility reporting that indirectly influence environmental performance perception. Option D. Local zoning ordinances and land use planning regulations that may have indirect environmental consequences, but lack explicit monetary valuation mandates for impacts. The correct answer is A. Legislation and regulations that establish specific financial penalties or compensation mechanisms for environmental damage or noncompliance with environmental standards. Explanation: ISO 14008-2019, Environmental Management, Valuation of Environmental Impacts and Related Environmental Aspects, Monetary Valuation, provides a framework for organizations to assign monetary values to environmental impacts. An internal auditor's role is to verify the effectiveness and compliance of this system. When identifying applicable environmental laws and regulations for monetary valuation, an auditor must consider those that directly mandate or influence the quantification of environmental damage or the financial liabilities associated with environmental degradation. This includes legislation related to pollution control, waste management, resource depletion, and biodiversity loss, especially where penalties or compensation mechanisms are defined in monetary terms. For instance, a national law establishing a carbon tax or a regional regulation imposing fines for exceeding effluent discharge limits would be directly relevant. The auditor's objective is to ensure that the organization's monetary valuation process accurately reflects these legal requirements and financial exposures. This involves reviewing how the organization identifies relevant legislation, how it translates legal requirements into valuation parameters, and how it accounts for potential financial implications stemming from non-compliance or regulatory mandates. The focus is on the practical application of these laws within the organization's valuation methodology, ensuring that the monetary values assigned are grounded in legal obligations and potential financial consequences. The auditor is not assessing legal compliance itself, but rather the integration of legal and regulatory considerations into the organization's environmental impact valuation process, as per ISO 14008. Question 29. During an internal audit of an organization's environmental impact valuation process, an auditor is reviewing the application of the damage cost approach as specified by ISO 14008-2019. Considering the inherent complexities of this valuation method, which of the following data sets is most critical for ensuring the accuracy and completeness of the monetary valuation of environmental impacts? Option A. Market price data for environmental credits and allowances, alongside reports on the organization's carbon footprint and energy consumption metrics. Option B. Expert opinions and stakeholder consultations regarding the perceived severity of environmental issues without specific quantitative data on physical impacts or receptor exposure. Option C. Comprehensive data detailing physical impact quantities, environmental pathways, receptor exposure levels, and established monetary values for resultant damages to human health and ecosystems. Option D. Detailed records of the organization's historical expenditure on environmental mitigation and remediation activities, along with projected future compliance costs. The correct answer is C. Comprehensive data detailing physical impact quantities, environmental pathways, receptor exposure levels, and established monetary values for resultant damages to human health and ecosystems. Explanation: ISO 14008-2019, in its annexes, outlines various methods for the monetary valuation of environmental impacts. when an internal auditor is assessing the application of these methods. Critical aspect is understanding the specific data requirements for each. For the damage cost approach, which seeks to quantify the economic consequences of environmental damage, the data needs are extensive and complex. This approach typically requires information on the physical quantity of the environmental impact, e.g., tons of CO2 emitted, liters of polluted water, the environmental pathways through which the impact reaches receptors, e.g., atmospheric dispersion, hydrological transport, the exposure of those receptors, e.g., population density in affected areas, ecosystem sensitivity, and finally, the monetary value of the damage to those receptors, e.g., healthcare costs for respiratory illnesses, loss of agricultural productivity, ecosystem service degradation. The quality and availability of data at each of these stages are paramount for a robust valuation. For instance, understanding the dose-response relationship between pollutant concentration and health effects is crucial for estimating healthcare costs. Similarly, the economic valuation of changes in biodiversity requires data on ecosystem functions and services, and how these are perceived and valued by society, which can be derived from methods like contingent valuation or choice experiments. The auditor must verify that the organization has systematically collected and validated data that addresses these multifaceted requirements to ensure the accuracy and reliability of the monetary valuation. Question 30. An internal auditor reviewing an organization's environmental management system, audited against ISO 14008-2019, encounters a scenario where the company's aggressive expansion strategy is projected to significantly increase its carbon footprint. The company's economic projections show substantial revenue growth, but the environmental impact assessment, using methods aligned with ISO 14008, indicates a considerable increase in monetized climate change externalities. Considering the principles of monetary valuation of environmental impacts and the broader goal of sustainable development, what is the most critical consideration for the auditor when assessing the company's adherence to the standard in this context? Option A. The absolute reduction in the company's overall greenhouse gas emissions, irrespective of the economic growth trajectory or the effectiveness of the monetary valuation methods employed. Option B. The extent to which the company has lobbied governmental bodies to relax environmental regulations related to carbon emissions, thereby mitigating the reported monetary costs. Option C. Whether the company has adequately integrated the monetized costs of increased greenhouse gas emissions into its strategic planning and decision-making processes, demonstrating a commitment to internalizing environmental externalities. Option D. The company's ability to offset its increased carbon footprint through the purchase of carbon credits on the voluntary market, without a clear demonstration of internal emission reduction efforts or strategic integration of monetized impacts. The correct answer is C. Whether the company has adequately integrated the monetized costs of increased greenhouse gas emissions into its strategic planning and decision-making processes, demonstrating a commitment to internalizing environmental externalities. Explanation: ISO 14008-2019, which focuses on the monetary valuation of environmental impacts, inherently grapples with the complex interplay between economic development and environmental preservation. While economic growth is often pursued for societal benefit, it can lead to increased resource consumption and pollution, thus creating negative environmental externalities. The standards framework for monetary valuation aims to quantify these externalities, allowing for their integration into decision-making processes. This quantification can reveal the true cost of economic activities, including environmental degradation. For instance, a policy promoting rapid industrial expansion without robust environmental controls might show short-term economic gains, but when the cost of air pollution, water contamination, and resource depletion is monetarily accounted for, the net societal benefit could be negative. The standards approach encourages a shift towards valuing natural capital and ecosystem services, which are often undervalued in traditional economic models. This perspective is crucial for achieving a sustainable development path where economic progress does not come at the irreversible expense of the environment. The challenge lies in accurately assigning monetary values to diverse environmental impacts, ranging from biodiversity loss to climate change, and ensuring these valuations are transparent and defensible. The core principle is that by making the environmental costs visible through monetary valuation, businesses and policymakers are better equipped to make informed choices that align economic objectives with environmental stewardship, thereby fostering a more sustainable economic model that internalizes environmental externalities rather than externalizing them.